There are a lot of us. I'm going to hand on, without any further ado, to Besnik Bislimi for some introductory thoughts on this area, please, of development and growth in the Western Balkans.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here for this discussion. I am one of those that are very happy to see that we are moving from the discussion on peace, security, solidarity, stability to economy. Actually, the goal of our government is to make sure that in the near future, when we meet our international friends and partners, the discussion doesn't start with questions about tensions, eventual tensions, about peace and stability, but the questions are, how did you manage that economic growth of more than 10%? How did you manage this fast accession towards EU? Are you managing the energy situation and others? So we are looking forward for a new steady state where economy is in the forefront and not security issues. I would want to design my introductory speech around 5 questions that I want to address. The first of them is, what do we want as Kosovo? When we discuss about our goals and priorities, usually this discussion is associated with these key terms and concepts: jobs, justice, investment, exports, formalization, energy, environment, sustainability, education, and diaspora. These are the key terms that you will find in any meaningful discussion about the goal of this government, especially when it comes to the economic aspect. The next question that I want to address is, are we succeeding in achieving our goals and targets? And I would want to use here 5 indicators. Each of them has a specific role. If you want to create the analogy with basketball, each of the players on the team has a role: the center, the point guard, the shooting guard, small forward, big forward. And I will use 5 indicators. We recorded a double-digit growth rate. This will be our center, so 10.7%. We increased our budget revenues by 30% in 1 year. Let's say this is the small forward. We managed to increase our exports by 2/3 in only 1 year. These are all numbers that relate only to 2021. Let's call this the power forward. We managed to increase our FDI by 22%, call this the shooting guard, and we managed to create 35,000 jobs, out of which 10,000 are formalized jobs. And you know how difficult it is to reduce the informal economy, and also how important for the business environment is to reduce the informal economy. The next question that I want to address in this opening speech is to look for the sources of this success. If the answer to the second question is yes, we were successful, the next question will be, but what contributed to this success? And I will want to point 4 strengths here. First, the quality of democracy. I see part of these indicators that I mentioned in the second question as a dividend on democracy, as a way how the business community, but also households, show the trust in the new institutions. The second element that is very important is the so-called political stability. Kosovo has been an exporter of stability in the past 18 months, and this has been also reflected in a much faster path towards fulfillment of EU integration paths. The third strength is our successful anti-corruption policy. I think it was mentioned before, Kosovo jumped for 17 places in the International Transparency Index, which shows the commitment of this government to rule of law. And the fourth element that I would want to address is the quality of our recovery packages. We had several recovery packages that addressed the challenges of the pandemic, but also the challenges of the energy crisis, and I will want to use this as an indicator or contributor to the success. The fourth question that I want to answer is, what do we offer to potential investors? What are the strengths of Kosovo vis-à-vis the region? So why you should include Kosovo in the decision-making when you decide on the perfect location for your investment. And I will simply list some of them without having the ability to elaborate. We have the highest internet penetration in the region. We have very attractive labor cost taxes, corporate income taxes, and very good provisions for repatriation of profits. We have established a commercial court. We have euro as a currency which completely eliminates any exchange rate risks. We have very successful reduction in bureaucratic procedures. Now it's possible to create a business in 2 days. We have agreement with many countries on avoidance of double taxation. We have free access to EU market, and we have a preferential access to the US market. We have completely harmonized our legislation with that of the EU. Our laws are even being translated into English and published on the websites. We have completely a new strategy on anti-corruption and asset confiscation. We have much advanced legislation on economic zones, private entrepreneurship and innovation. We have excellent alternatives for outsourcing on the IT sector or business process outsourcing. We have an economy that enables you to produce at relatively comparative and competitive unit labor costs. We have the ability to secure nearby producers in the supply chain. And let's say we have a competitive transportation networks, including the fact that Kosovo is very close to several seaports. Now I'm coming to the last questions. Where do we see the potential for attraction of foreign investors, or where do we have promising sectors? And I think on this also other panelists will talk, especially Mr. Zeka. ICT is one of these sectors with young, educated, and skilled and multilingual labor that we have. Most of our companies produce in the IT sector mostly for the export sector. Then we have food processing and beverage industry that accounts for almost 10% of our exports and showed very high growth rates in the past. We have mining and energy, and I'm sure Minister Izvanoli will talk more on this in her panel. We have automotive components industry, and industry that used to be very efficient in the past. The resources are there, talent or the skills are there, we only need to tap it again. Winter tourism is also a very promising sector for growth, and one of the fastest growing economic sectors in economy is the wood processing industry, a sector that managed to double production in only 2 years. I will stop here and then be available for discussion later.
I know how painful it is to stick to time, and so I very much appreciate you making your best attempt to do so. I would ask the other panelists to keep everything as short as possible as well, because there's a lot of us, and we do want time for questions. So I'm going to pass on to Mr. Batiki from North Macedonia. Your thoughts, please.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I see here today we have mixed audience, government representatives and business, and it's perfect for raising two questions I have that are part rhetorical, and in part I will try to make my fair efforts to address, no matter that I'm an ex-basketball player, so I will speak as a politician. The first one is, if we might make up one industry that we can start talking about developing without the lack of working force being raised as an issue or discussion in our region. That's the first question. And the second one is how we can maintain growth and sustainability in smaller, fragile economies for Western Balkans. So, as I was actually thinking about the subtopic of this panel, investing for inclusive and sustainable growth, my mind got scattered to as many possibilities and opportunities there are, but none of those were possible without people. People that share the same belief and optimism of getting over this crisis and inclusiveness and justness. To address the topic of this panel, how we should develop towards sustainable growth, it must be towards gaining back the trust that hard work pays off, responsibility is rewarded, and anyone could make it if they tried. No matter who you were, no matter where you came from, no matter how you started. And it must be actually right away. Moreover, we in Balkans have in our DNA to work hard and contribute not only for ourselves and our families, but as well for the entire humanity through different personalities, Nobelists, such as Mother Teresa, Nikola Tesla, Ferit Murati, and others. Faster steps towards reaching the stage of doing business based on fair play. A fair shot and fair share will require all of us to see that we have a stake in each other's success. And it will require that we will take responsibility and that will obtain sustainability. For this, we need to join the forces of the powerful, as we call it, triple helix: government, business, and people. Both our countries, North Macedonia and Kosovo, are similar in many ways. And now I believe we should be fighting for our people and the open debate about what businesses and government are doing for them, and not just as political rhetoric. The debate between the three parties should be of the best way to restore trust, restore growth, to restore prosperity and fairness. And the bottom line that will perpetuate us all forward and upward. Restore, as we call it, solidarity. And yeah, how we got reminded of solidarity in the hard way for the past 3 years. Thus, as I say, social democratic governments need to restore the middle class. We need to restore the belief in the intrinsic value and integrity of workers. This is defining issues of our time. This is a make or break moment for the middle class and the developing force for our sustainable growth. And both our social democratic governments should take the pledge in doing so. The key towards developing the middle class and in the same time the labor market is bridging the gap between the old and new qualification that the labor market is hungry for. Both our countries are coming out of a system that was not really supportive to requalification on fast-paced change as we have now. So we need to work together, government and business, into building people. We should be giving people the chance to get new skills and training so that they can learn to make semiconductors and high-powered batteries, deal with mechatronics, or even work with AI, artificial intelligence. We should invest time and money into developing their potential by giving them resources, time, and the opportunity to do so. This cannot be done by governments alone. This has to be a joint effort because it is of joint interest, and if you ask me, of joint importance and value. The workforce is a bloodstream of the economy, and you cannot grow if you cut your lifeblood. And that is the skill and experience that the workforce delivers. So let's build on that. And the second topic that I raised in the beginning was about how we can maintain growth and sustainability in small and fragile economies of Western Balkans. I think first and foremost, we need a change in the strategy of the game that we are playing. The shift from dependencies of each other on different resources towards creating strong bonds of interdependencies. This new approach will create higher growth, more innovation, and a stable region. Therefore, this will bring us to another stadium of economic development since we will not compete between us in every industry or sector, but it will drive us to work together and be more competitive as a region as a whole. Based on the global shifts in the new economic era, the fastest way that we can jointly work and bring value for our countries is through creating joint platforms for attracting FDIs with similar packages for support and bring the whole value chain from the Far East to our region. And instead of competing among us, who will get the investor, let's change our approach. We seek for value chain as a whole to bring here, and not only one single company that will employ 1,000 employees. So nearshoring is an eminent thing to be done and to happen now. Ladies and gentlemen, the key towards sustainability and growth of our economies is through building trust. First, of our citizens in the government and businesses, and the second is building trust between our countries. We go up or we go down, but we go together. That is why we should work together for an economy where both businesses and workers can and should win. Thank you.
You gave us back 13 seconds, so I greatly appreciate that. Before we move on to our business representatives, I'm going to hand over to Colin Ellis from Moody's. I'm doing my best not to hold it against you that you put the UK onto a negative outlook, so let's just leave that to one side and give us your thoughts, please, on this region.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and good afternoon, everybody. It is wonderful to be here today. It has to be said, as Alistair hinted, rating agencies are rarely seen as the kind of bearers of good news. You normally hear from us when things are going wrong, and indeed with the recent announcement on the UK, we can talk about that in the break, I think, because it's not the focus here today. But actually, we do have a perspective on growth and development. We rate over 120 countries around the world as Moody's. Most of them have pretty long track records. And the question of how you generate lasting, sustainable growth is actually a really, really important one for us when we think about government's ability to refinance and manage their debts. What does sustainable debt look like? And in its very simplest, sometimes you can just frame that in terms of managing the financing gap. As a young, relatively middle or low income economy, development is what you want to aspire for, because that's how you generate welfare, that's how you make the lives of your citizens better. But you often don't always have the funds to do it, and finding all of the money in order to generate the investment in the infrastructure and all that kind of great stuff is the challenge. People often borrow money. That's where we come in. Our job at the end of the day is to tell you whether we think someone's debt is sustainable or not. And I want to say a few things about sectors, because that's part of the focus here today. But I also want to make a pretty broad point that I think was actually picked up in the morning session and just emphasise that, because that's incredibly important for us. When we look at economies around the world, when we think about sustainable development, we do, of course, look at the near-term prospects for different sectors around the world. And at the moment, we have 4 sectors that we're highlighting as probably in a good place to benefit over the next 12 to 18 months. Those are hospitality, communication, and maybe a little more depressingly, defence and aerospace, for fairly obvious reasons. But the reality is we're about to go into a global downturn. We heard some of the macro data, the forecasts, in the very first session this morning, and we very much share that view that it is going to be a tough, probably 18 to 24 months around the world. But that's why I think it's really important not just to focus on the near term, but to look beyond that. And Kosovo stands out for me as a region where we're already seeing immense progress in recent years. So 2 things that we always talk about, and you've heard it already a lot today. We talk about the digital economy. There are plans underway. The World Bank programme here is going to have a material impact. The government is supporting that with its policies. But we kind of need to look beyond the obvious. One of the lessons from COVID is a lot of service sector work, if you're talking about research or analysis or briefing, can be done from anywhere. As a global company, we have hubs in Bangalore, Vilnius, Costa Rica, where an awful lot of the critical work that underpins all of our analysis is done. There's no reason why I couldn't see that being done here as well. When we think about the green agenda, we can talk about obvious things like climate change and solar power and all that kind of stuff, but there is still a very real global need to address some of the transitional issues. We are not going to get to net zero without finding a way to make mining, metals and metal processing, minerals, greener. There is a lack of private sector money available for that right now. We see that as a gap. And so where governments are willing to step in and lead and partner with private sector firms in those more difficult areas, they have the potential to be really strong winners, because those kind of technologies will be used around the world. The same goes for carbon capture and storage. Right? We will not get to net zero without that. The same goes for nuclear. Nuclear is very expensive, but we now have these new modular reactors that are being, why can't we have some of them here? Why can't there be a partnership between some of the companies there, relying on the stable political environment, the infrastructure, the backing from the government to kind of do that here? And all of this comes back to one final point that I'll make very quickly. For us, when we look at how countries have become stronger and developed over time, the single most important thing is institutional strength. Right? Essentially, and this is going to sound a little bit odd, particularly for various young countries in this part of the world, it is remembering an old adage from a British politician, which is sometimes the purpose of power is to give it away. Sometimes you have to put your trust in institutions. And the fundamental reason for that is because the growth and development plans that we're talking about have a much longer shelf life than any individual government in a democracy. I'm going to stop there, Alistair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You only gave us back 2 seconds, so but still better than nothing. Every little helps, as they say. So let's move on now. We've heard from government, and we've heard from the rating agency. Let's hear from our business representatives today. First, over to you, Cosmas Van Vallis. I think what you're going to tell us ties in quite nicely with this idea of the need for a sustainable development. So please go ahead.
Thank you. So it's really good that we are not talking only about growth, but we are talking about sustainable growth. And maintenance that I represent, we believe that it's a main pillar regarding sustainable growth. Let's see a few figures about maintenance. Maybe it's not so attractive. Nevertheless, there are about 10% based on the statistics of the European GDP is devoted on maintenance, which is making 1.6 trillion euros. Also, if we consider the personnel, 7% of the European population is working on the maintenance field, which is about 35 million persons working on this domain. So it is an important one, although it's usually on the background. But let's try to link maintenance with sustainable growth. There are 5 reasons for this. One is the energy. So if our assets are well maintained, they will consume less energy. Second reason is the life cycle of the assets. If they are also well maintained, their life cycle is extended. And now with all this environment that is high in the agenda of Europe and all this green logic, it's really important to extend the life cycle of the assets. And for all the companies now, it's more important to think before they recycle or before they dispose an asset, to think how we can extend its life. Also, maintenance is important for the quality of the products. If the assets are well maintained, they don't produce defects. So it's another aspect with a direct link. Finally, but not less important, is the safety issues. So maintenance is relevant with the accidents. Based on statistics, we have seen in Sweden that 10% of the railway problems were linked with, or accidents were linked with maintenance. Or from Boeing, a report on 1995, it was mentioning that 15% of the jet accidents were linked also with maintenance. But of course, we had some very important accidents as well, like the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, that it was based on the New York article. It was linked again with maybe drilling priorities in relation to safety priorities. So for all these reasons, we understand that maintenance, it's not anymore on our mindset a cost, but it's an investment. And it's really good that companies are changing their mindset, they are investing on this direction, and they are thinking on this, which is good for their sustainability, but also for the sustainability of our society. Here comes some difficulties. The Prime Minister mentioned on this in the morning that companies want to invest on maintenance, but it's not easy to find personnel. Maybe they don't have the right skills. Maybe the skills can change from time to time, so we need the young personnel have to be well trained and to be updated on all the new technologies, which is very important. Another thing is that maybe young people prefer to have a job in an office than working in the shop floor of a factory, which is less attractive as an environment. But if we close, let's go to the good news. Maintenance is using now all the modern technologies, is being done remotely, so this is more important, is using now artificial intelligence to achieve the prediction of the failures. We're having sensors everywhere, collecting data, running algorithms is being more effective, and the management is more happy about that it's effective, and also the personnel working on it is also more happy because it's more challenging. Thank you.
I find it absolutely fascinating because it's not an area that we think about or focus on, particularly when we talk about development. You know, the guys keeping things working can be as important, make as big a contribution as the guys who made the thing work in the first place. So it's a fascinating area to explore, I think. But let's move along to Ariane Zeka, the Executive Director at the American Chamber of Commerce here in Kosovo. Would you like to give us your thoughts?
Thank you very much. I feel absolutely delighted to be speaking on behalf of the American Chamber of Commerce in Kosovo and to be representing a significant portion of Kosovo's private sector and which has significant impact at the same time on Kosovo's economy. I prepared opening remarks, which is a very rare occasion in my particular case, but out of respect for the organizers and also to meet the strict timeline requirements. So we are living in extraordinary times, and extraordinary times require both intelligent measures and extraordinary measures at the same time as well. But more importantly, they require collaboration and dialogue, comprehensive dialogue, as is the case now here with us. Hence, I could not think of a more proper time than for the Western Balkans in general and Kosovo in particular than this one chosen by Economist Impact to organize this summit in Kosovo. Crisis after crisis have marked our last 3 decades, and unfortunately, they are not likely to end. And ironically, I guess new crises may emerge in the coming days, weeks, and months. We have experienced some unprecedented developments over this period that have shaken our systems, models, and patterns of behavior at an extensive level. Nevertheless, they have tested our resilience and economic decision-making capabilities as well. Mistakes were made, weaknesses were identified, and glitches in the system were uncovered. Opportunities were missed, and hopefully lessons were learned as well. Constant global struggles and resilience remind me of a quote of the former US President Theodore Roosevelt, who said, "Courage is not having the strength to go on. It's going on when you don't have the strength." However, at times, the courage is not the most important thing, and it's not sufficient. We need to utilize our brains as well for a well-thought approach. The recent crisis is a reconfirmation that we need a new growth model. The ever-increasing natural disasters, on the other hand, remind us that we need a model that will enable a green growth as well, which was emphasized and underlined in this panel as well. It is time for an acceleration of the climate transition. I remember the early days of the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. In our dialogue with the government at that time, the Deputy Prime Minister was Minister of Finance, reiterating that Kosovo has an outstanding chance to restructure its economic growth model. We emphasized that manufacturers may have a unique opportunity to bridge the supply chain gaps, and luckily it did become a reality. In 2019, Kosovo's exports amounted to around 383 million. Only a year after it, the exports grew to 20%. They doubled in 2021 compared again to 2019. Export is one thing, but meeting the local demand, on the other hand, is another thing, and an important one. All the recent crises we have experienced should have taught us that we need to strengthen our capacities to absorb more effectively the supply shocks. The current disruptions should catalyze change, and innovation should be at the core of these efforts. Ironically, again, growth trends will be affected by new unfavorable circumstances. Higher interest rates will slow down investment plans. Unsecured and more expensive energy supply will significantly impede further growth, as will the workforce shortages do. The latter triggers the need for more flexible foreign labor policies. In general, Kosovo, and as a matter of fact, many other countries, need redesigned industrial policies. to further support and develop their manufacturing capabilities. We cannot lose the momentum, despite how dark the prospects may look. In February, Kosovo's Energy Regulatory Office, and I know the people of ERO are here, refrained from increasing energy tariffs for businesses, taking it into account a recommendation of Kosovo's government, a decision that was greeted by the representatives of the private sector. I hope we will be able to sustain this no increased tariff for businesses approach in the coming or during the next revision of tariffs as well. Higher electricity bills will mean higher price of consumer goods, and ultimately will further shrink the purchasing power in the country. I hope we will be able to find a model again that works and works for all. Lastly, the potential global recession will put restraint on investors' ambitions, as it will force them to become more selective in terms of international expansion. Kosovo and other Western Balkan countries need to unleash their creativity, and at the same time, they need to be more generous in terms of what they offer to foreign direct investors. And lastly, but not least importantly, the countries of this region should find the way to strengthen their partnership, to eliminate barriers to trade and cooperation, and promote free flow of people, goods, services, and capital. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks. Okay, well, we've heard from all of our speakers. I think we've had a pretty broad range of views and information. So thank you very much for that. For the Q&A, I'm going to hand straight across to Branimir. Branimir, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, sure. So as a good Balkan boy living in the West, living in the EU, my question will be trying to replicate something that the EU is doing in the Western Balkans. Concretely, it's about windfall taxes. We saw that the EU a couple of weeks ago adopted a decision, decided to introduce windfall taxes, which means taxes on excessive profits that companies are making due to the high prices now, and to use that money that they will collect through those taxes in order to help those who are suffering from this higher price, from the crisis. So what do you think about doing the same in the Western Balkans? All of you talked about how we should invest more into sustainable development, into green infrastructure, but to do that you need money, governments need money. And on the other hand, you cannot find that money easily, at least on the international markets, because interest rates are soaring everywhere. So these windfall taxes appear to be like a very logical solution to all this problem. So what's your take on that? And Alistair, is it okay if we go through everybody, very short answer from everybody? Okay, good. So maybe 1 minute take from all of you, starting with the Deputy Prime Ministers.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know whether I'm the best person to answer this when the Minister of Finance is in the room. However, it's true that in these extraordinary times, there are certain companies in certain sectors that are enjoying windfall gains. However, the question is, what is the best policy to address this issue, knowing that none of the policies that you can implement will be a perfect one. If you decide to start with windfall gain taxes, you are pretty much violating one of the key guiding principles of a good tax policy, which is the stability of the tax system. And the question is, what will be the signals that you send to the business community if the tax policy can change from time to time, depending on the situation in the economy? Or you will do use another bad instrument that you normally don't want to use, which is put ceilings on the prices for those key products that are leading to the windfall gains for the companies. We have seen in the past 12 months that there are mainly two sources of these excessive profits. One of these are shortages of basic food products caused by the war in Ukraine, and second are price manipulations inside the country. Because you see also, for example, producers of hamburgers saying that we have to increase the price because of the increase in the energy prices or others. And then the question is, what will be the best policy to address this issue? Of course, for some basic foods, I will say use the unpopular price ceiling. For other sectors, if the situation continues, there will be no other choice but also to go back to windfall taxes.
Thanks.
Well, I will come to the answer of Branimir, but first is what we are for here at the moment as governments. We are here to create an enabling environment in which economy will grow, become more competitive, and therefore being able to pay taxes. If we are talking on small economy, fragile economies, talking only on taxes without talking on sustainable tax system and predictability, which is one of the crucial moments for the economy, I think that whatever intervention you do to the tax system will not give result, or it will give short-term results in terms of additional revenues, but in a medium term to long term you will lose your competitiveness, because in a fragile economies like we are in the Balkans, we cannot act as in the developed economies. If you would ask me, personally, yes, because you have to show that there should be a kind of ethics in the way how the companies act, even in a period of crisis. So whether it is with a windfall tax, that might be one of the things to be done. But whether it is the most sustainable things to do, I'm not really sure, because we have had the cases of different individual tries out in individual countries throughout the Western Balkans, where actually we have seen, because of certain decision of one government of one country, that the other economies of the other countries and the other governments have gained from that decision. We had the case of progressive taxation 3 years ago, putting it in North Macedonia, and then most of our labor force and people, even the companies, they went to Kosovo and Serbia and in Bulgaria and trying to avoid. So, yeah, the issue of windfall taxes is something to be considered, but it should be considered regionally, even though we do not have a regional policies as European Union has, because in European Union, when they decide on a much bigger market. But this might be one of the things in which we might sit together and say that there is a common stand on this, because that might actually improve the competitiveness of our economy, meaning Western Balkan economy.
There have been unusual and possibly unearned profits in various business sectors as a result of the distortions in the market arising from the war in Ukraine. What's your view, your thoughts from a business perspective?
Well, I was praying you were not going to ask this question, and particularly me as a representative of the private sector companies. We are in almost daily contacts with businesses in the country, and I certainly tend to believe that this is not the case, or not the case to a large extent. There might always be individual cases and examples of companies misusing the situation and manipulate with prices as well. But nevertheless, I think that the cost of the operational expenses in the country have increased significantly over the last year. And we're talking about migration of the workforce. So workforce unavailability. So what companies have been doing in order to maintain their current workforce is that they've increased salaries. And of course, this then affects the price of goods ultimately as well. So I tend to believe that this is not a widespread behavior, although I'm not overruling that this might be a possibility. If I may just relate very quickly to what was said earlier and some of the things that might be taken by the governments, and it's not by accident that I included in my opening remarks the fact that we need to strengthen industrial capacities in order for the companies here and for the countries to be able to meet the local demands more. I'm going to refer to a recent legislative hearing in in United States, there was this discussion between a US legislator and the Federal Reserve boss, and at some point, so I'm going to skip most of the parts, at some point the US legislator asked the Federal Reserve boss, and he said, so you're saying that inflation is happening because supply cannot meet the demand? And he said, yes, absolutely. And he said, so why increase interest rates? So why not focus on supporting local industrial or development of industrial capacities so that supply then can meet the increased demand? That's why I said in my opening remarks, this is something that we need to see. We need to see a new industrial policy. Local governments in the Western Balkans, I mean, governments in all the countries of the Western Balkans have limited financial capabilities as well. The European Union support, financial support in this case, is of utmost importance.
You can steal 30 seconds, but no more.
Okay. So I don't know whether this is an indicator of the existence of excessive profits in the Kosovar economy, but just I will give you two numbers so that you can use them to interpret. 2021, our tax revenues went up by 30%, and then based on this performance, we increased the target for this year by another 10%, and we are now in month 10, so another 7 days to start my months, which means 80% of the time. But the revenues from the corporate income tax are 6% above the planned annual revenues, which means we have already exceeded the plan for 2022. I want to believe that this is a result of the better performance of the economy, but part of it could be attributed also to excessive profits of particular sectors of the economy. But for this, you need some deeper analysis to go on that. But it's a good sign that the business sector is operating better than before.
Okay. Fabulous, thank you. Cosmas, let me pass over to you. You can address, if you want, narrowly this question of windfall taxes and the business response to that. But what's been clear, I think, the discussion that we've had so far is there's some difficult relationship between business and policymakers. Obviously coming from different priority sets, but it has to work if business is going to work and if policymakers are going to get the growth and development that they're looking for. So feel free to broaden your thoughts a little if you would like.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I don't think that in our daily business there are really so much effect. Of course, now I understand that there is this issue of the energy, and in practice, although it's not my expertise, I understand that in Greece we have 90% tax for this extra profits on the companies of the energy, so it's something that it has been implemented. But in principle, I think that it's good for the companies not to be so much influenced by the change of economic policy, so they can develop and it can be a stable policy that it can last for years, so each company can plan without being affected by so dramatic changes on the political situation. I think the energy is now a situation that is different, that we have the political system has to take decisions and to change the situation, but in general I think it's better if we are not so influenced.
Thanks very much. Colin, I'm going to hand over to you for a final word. Do be aware that all of these people now are supposed to be having lunch. But don't let me rush you.
No pressure, thank you. So very quickly on windfall taxes, I agree with, I think, pretty much everything the Deputy Prime Ministers have talked about. It's a short-term measure, it's a lump sum. It doesn't really factor into our thinking about medium-term fiscal prospects, because it's normally a one-off thing. It's much better to grow the tax base the way that's been described. In terms of a broader remark about business, I think maybe tax rates, if I can have a little poke at the EU, I mean, tax rates are important, but I come back to this point about institutions and rules, and something simple like having clarity over an insolvency process is incredibly important, because the reality is in a market economy, through no fault of their own sometimes, some businesses are going to go bust. And being able to resolve that very quickly is important. And it's an area where the EU is still struggling. 30 years into the Capital Markets Union project, there are 27 different insolvency regimes. So that's a potential comparative advantage right here, if you can come up with a way of addressing that clearly and quickly, as some of the parts of the world have.
Fabulous, beautifully concise. Well, we're going to finish there for the moment. Mario Bikarski will be back hosting you after lunch, and I'll be back a little later on in the afternoon. But for the moment, before you go for your lunch, please join me in thanking our fabulous panel. Thank you, gentlemen.